I'm going to show you guys in this video a method, no in fact two methods, of how to repair 99% of scratches on your car. The things I'm going to show you, probably you previously thought were magic. They're not magic, there's a method to everything, and I'm going to explain it in this relatively short video. And even better than all that, I'm going to show you how to do it with the most minimal tools possible. It'll only cost you a few quid, but it will save you thousands. So as you can see from this blade, which is extremely sharp, we've caused some damage to the paintwork on this car. And if we zoom in a little more closely, we can actually see where some of that top coat has actually come away as we've scratched it. So in this video, I'm going to use minimal tools. I'm going to keep it minimal cost, and it's not going to take very long, and you're going to be surprised because I'm going to do a full explanation of exactly what has happened here. So don't worry if you're not a car expert and this isn't your forte. I'm going to explain everything. I'm going to keep it simple, and I'm going to try and use tools and maybe things that are not only cost effective, but you might already have anyway. So we're going to get straight into the video, and if anyone's ever watched any of my content, I'm always the same. I get straight into it, no nonsense, talking for 20 minutes before anything starts. Let's crack on. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to have a look at exactly what's happened with the paint on this car, why the scratch looks the way it does, what we can do about it, and how we can move forward. Now, I'm aware there's actually lots of content on YouTube about how to repair or remove scratches. So I'm going to use some props that I've made to very quickly and simply explain something that might be a bit of a light bulb moment for a lot of people and make you think, ah, right, I never knew that. That's how it works. So let's imagine that this is our paintwork, this is the car. We'll zoom in and we'll do exactly the same as what we've done to the car. So if we zoom in again, and now imagine that we've zoomed right the way in. And this is the scratch. So if you imagine we were zoomed in and we was able to see a side profile of the panel with the scratch on it, that is what it would look like. So it's all within the lacquer clear coat, but we've gone quite far into it. So if you look at it from the side angle, there's your colour coat, the paintwork, there's your lacquer, there's your scratch from the side profile. We're not actually working on the paint, and I think that's the misconception, how it's worded, that you've got a scratch in your paint. Your actual colour on modern cars is below a top surface, a lacquer, a clear coat. So that scratch on that car is in your clear coat, not your paint. So we're only a couple of minutes into the video and already we've learned a really important piece of information. But we're not going to stop here. I'm going to prove to you that this isn't a gimmick or some hack. And to add to that, I'd also say that this is probably the case with 99% of scratches that are on your car. Really at this point, we're probably left with two main options. We either fill the scratch or we remove the layers around the scratch to level it out. Both options, both have the pros and cons, and what it's probably going to boil down to is time, budget, and whether you've got the products that are accessible to you at the time that you want to undertake the repair. I do these videos to help you guys. I want you to improve your skills, and hopefully you're going to really learn something over the next few minutes. So we've got our sandpaper, but we don't really need that much sandpaper. So let's not waste material, let's not waste money, let's get it a more suitable size for the job that we're trying to undertake. You may have your own rubbing block or something that you might want to use. You could even use a little piece of wood if that's all you've got. I'm just going to use this little piece of rubber that I use for a rubbing block. I'm just going to size it up. So I think we can cut these sheets down to half. I like to soak my sandpaper before I use it, probably for about 10-15 minutes. So the sandpaper has been soaking in the bucket while I went for some lunch, and don't be surprised if it curls up like that. It's absolutely fine. I've also got just a normal spray bottle with some water in it. I've put a tiny bit of soap inside the water just for a bit of lubrication. So we're going to use some of the fine sanding paper to start to level off the scratch. So what you'll find with sandpaper is the less of the number, the more coarse it is. So just for comparison, there's 1200. That is 80. So obviously we're not going to be rubbing that on the car. That's for really harsh, coarse sanding. So if the number goes up, then it's getting finer and finer in its grade. So I'm just going to wrap that sandpaper around the little block. Got a spray bottle. It's important to keep it well lubricated whenever you're sanding. And we're just going to start sanding across the scratch. It's important that you always check your progress when you're sanding and polishing a car, especially with a machine. You just need to see where you're going and what you're dealing with. Have you sanded the scratch out already? Do you need to go any further? So while you watch me do that, I'm just going to narrate over it while I'm sanding down the panel. It's important to mention that when you're sanding the clear coat, you are literally sanding away the clear coat. So what I'm sort of getting at is you can't just endlessly sand and sand away the surface, as well as when you're using cutting compounds and cutting pastes, any kind of heavy polishing with a machine, you can't just keep going and going and going at it, and I suppose that's where the limitation lies. Even though, as I mentioned earlier on, 1200 grit is considered a fine sanding grit, because it is, but when you're sanding clear coat, lacquer, whatever you call it, it's probably as coarse as I will go on any kind of top coat car surface. So hopefully from the explanation what I did before we started sanding, that we can't unfortunately keep sanding forever. There is a limit to it, and although that 1200 isn't a very coarse sandpaper, when you're talking about really thin microns of layers of lacquer, it is considered quite a coarse sandpaper. So we do need to proceed with caution and make sure that we're not removing too much of the clear coat, which is going to get down to our colour base coat. Because once that happens, we're pretty much in a situation where it'd have to have a respray anyway. So we're just going to follow up where we've been with the 1200 with some 1500 paper, again wrapped around the block. Okay, so that's the 1200 and 1500 stages done. You'll probably notice that I'm widening the area of sanding each time with each grit. I do this to make sure that I'm levelling out the clear coat lacquer. I'm not going to cause a groove by digging in too much. And also I want to 100% make sure that where I've done the 1200 grit or whatever course you've done before it, I want to make sure that I'm going slightly wider each time, because then I know that the sanding marks from the previous grit have definitely been removed. Okay, so we're on to the 2000 grit stage. So I'm just going to speed things up a little bit while we get this bit done, so we can crack on with the rest of the video. So finally, we're going to go for the final stage of the sanding process, and this is 3000 grit. So at this point now, the area should be nice and evenly sanded. You've widened the area to level it out. You've removed all the previous sanding grits, so the only grit that you've got left to polish up now is the 3000 grit, which is a really fine grit. So we know that the compound is going to cut through it, and it's hopefully going to bring some shine and clarity back to the area. Today I'm going to be using Freichler G360 cutting compound. I do like this compound, but there's plenty on the market. Whatever you can get hold of, you might already have some. As long as it's a cutting compound and not a wax or a fine polish, it should be absolutely fine for removing sanding marks and scratches, cutting paint back, that kind of thing. Also, this is a really good compound. I've left some links in the description of this video for both of these. Whatever you can get hold of. I know some of you guys in the different countries can't get hold of this, but you can get hold of this. They're both just as good as each other. They'll both do exactly the same. So in this video, we're going to be using a cordless drill. So for a very small amount of money, we are going to convert this cordless drill into a little mini buffing machine. So what we're going to need is we're going to need a backing plate or a backing pad, preferably a 3-inch one, and then we're also going to need a spindle that screws into there. Now you can actually buy these just like that with the spindle and the backing pad, but there's different variations of it. Sometimes you can just buy the backing pad and buy your own spindle, but effectively it does exactly the same job. This one's from Paint Gear. So what we do is we simply just put that in there like that, tighten it up. So we've effectively now got a hook and loop, they call it, Velcro backing plate. We can stick something to that. That simply sticks on there. There we have it. You've now got a pretty powerful, pretty effective little mini buffing machine. So it's always a good idea, if you've got some masking tape, just try and protect some of the surrounding areas. Particularly any door handles and anything that sticks out. We don't want to be catching the side of the buffing pad on these, because it could create some kind of burn through or damage the area. So we've got our drill, we've attached our backing plate, we've got a cutting pad, we've got a spindle that connects it all together. So this is effectively now a nice little polishing machine that you might not have even known you even had. So what we're going to be doing first is we're going to be priming the pad. I'll just talk over this bit while you're watching that. The reason why you prime a fresh pad is so that you're not polishing the area with a dry bit of the pad. The whole pad should be sort of lubricated with the polish or the compound. It's really important when you're doing any kind of polishing, sanding, any kind of work on, you know, the paint, you've got to keep checking your progress, because you might think you're doing all right and in actual fact you've not polished it enough, or you've gone too far down further into the job and you need to stay on one bit a little bit longer. So we're just going to wipe off the excess polish residue and try and see if we've removed the sanding marks okay. So I'm pretty happy with that so far. It's removed the sanding marks pretty well, to be fair. There's a little bit round here that I want to go over again. I've not quite polished there enough. And at this point, don't worry about all these polishing marks, these holograms and swirl marks. We're going to tackle them at the next stage. That's perfectly normal. That's what you get, especially under, you know, we're under artificial lighting or sunlight. You're going to get this kind of mark once you've done a bit of compounding. So this is how we're looking so far, and I'm pretty happy with the results, to be fair. It took a couple of hits with the polishing compound and the drill. Obviously takes a little bit longer if you're using a drill. It's not going to be as fast as a rotary machine or a high powered DA, but as you can see, it's definitely done what we needed it to do. That scratch is gone, or almost completely gone. However, we are left still with, I'm not quite 100% happy with it. We can see some little marks here. It's usually called marring or buffer trails, and it's because we've been using obviously a stiff orange pad, a cutting pad, and it leaves its own sort of fine scratches that are even finer than the 3000 grit sandpaper. So what we need to do is we need to basically refine it. You can really see it around there under these lights anyway. Some lights you won't be able to see it, but as soon as the sun hit it, that would really show up. So we're going to make it better than that. So for the polishing refining stage, I'm going to be using Frecklr G360 Finish. There are other brands. Again, Menzerner do a brand. It's available. I've put some links below if you want to use this stuff. They're both good. They're both excellent. I've used them both, and they're definitely going to do what we need them to do for the next stage. So all we need now is a finishing pad for them to go with. So for the next stage, I'm going to be using this Paint Gear black finishing pad. That's the stiff cutting pad. Now what's the difference between these two pads? They look the same, obviously the colours are different. This one's really coarse and stiff. This one's nice and soft, so it's a different type of foam. This one's for finishing, this one's for cutting, scratch removal, swirl removal, sanding mark removal, all that kind of stuff like we've just done. This is going to refine it. So we're just going to stick that on there exactly the same. Finishing paste or finishing polish, whatever you want to call it. Do that every single time. Try again, shall we? Every time. Now, what I've found over the years with finishing polishes is a little goes a long way. So we don't want to be smearing loads of the polish all over the place. We don't need that much, just a tiny amount. That is leaving us a really nice finish. Nice. So I'm well happy with that finish. I don't think anybody watching can argue with that finish. It looks great. We've done it with a drill and a bit of sandpaper. But let's move on to the next bit and try and find out a little bit more about the other method. As I said earlier, we're going to come back to this area here. This is where I touched in exactly the same scratches, but with the lacquer. What I'm actually putting into the scratch there is more lacquer. So I've obtained some lacquer and I'm just filling the scratch just purely with lacquer, no paint, just to fill the clear coat, the gap we've created. Which has got rid of the scratch, you can't see it, but we've also been left with a raised section where the lacquer's just sat on top of the car factory lacquer, and there's where I didn't do anything to it. That's the original scratch. So usually for a quick turnaround I'd probably dry this with heat lamps, but I'm thinking of you guys haven't got any means of drying such as heat lamps, so we're going to leave it till tomorrow. I'm going to come back to it and we're going to have a look at it and see if we can sort it out, make it look like that panel. Right, okay, so I've sped the next 30 seconds to minute up full speed. You've already seen me sanding. It's exactly the same process as we've just seen with the sandpaper, wet and dry, 1200, 15, 2000, 3000. So everything's exactly the same, except obviously on this panel we touched it in with the clear coat, the lacquer, we let it dry. Now we're just sort of leveling that out. So as you're leveling it, the idea is most of it fills the scratch, and obviously you're still having to surround some of the clear coat around the scratch. We can't get around that during the leveling process. So I suppose at this point you're probably going to say, well, which method's better? That depends if you can get hold of some lacquer or not. If you can, personally I actually think I prefer the lacquer method. I think it's a bit more tidy. I think it's a bit more, I think personally you remove less existing clear coat around the scratch than you do when you're just sanding it, because obviously you've added material, so now you're just trying to level the area. You're not having to level the existing clear coat all the way down to what is potentially quite a deep clear coat scratch. So just to summarise on that quickly, very fine clear coat scratches, perhaps just sand them, polish them like we did in the first section of the video. If you've got something a bit deeper, personally, if you can add some lacquer to it, some more material, some more clear coat, that's my personal choice. So I think they both have a place, and I hope this video served you well. Well guys, there we go. I hope you liked that video. I hope it was educational and that you've made it this far. Congratulations if you have. Hopefully it's given you an idea of how to maybe tackle some of the scratches and marks that are on your own car at home. You know, it's not the end of the world if it gets scratched. It's going to happen. we can avoid resprays. If the scratches aren't too bad like the ones in this video, then there's just another method for you guys to try out. And if you like it, leave a like, leave a comment, definitely hit subscribe. I need you to do those things for the channel to keep on existing and keep growing, and I appreciate you all. Thank you very much from CBR POV.